Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's virtual SUM session. My name is Caitlin Walker, and I'm a part of the marketing team here at Laerdal. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during this session, please share them via the Q&A feature that can be found at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring them during this session, and we will have time for questions at the end. To ensure you're able to see all speakers, select Gallery View. Recordings will be emailed to you after the session is over to watch on demand. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Andrew Kostopik.
Hi, everyone, and greetings from New York. I'm Andrew Kostopik. I'm the Senior Content Marketing Manager for Laerdal Medical, and I'm humbled to be here with so many people. We have over 1,000 people registered for this, and we look forward to bringing you this information to everyone across the country. Our thoughts go out to those being impacted by the smoke and fires on the West Coast, and certainly our friends in Florida who've been impacted by the hurricane that's crossed over Pensacola. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Melody Bethards, who is a new EDD, and she's going to tell us maybe a little bit about that. She's with the nursing simulation faculty at Des Moines Area Community College. Welcome, Melody. So nice to have you again. You've spoken with us before, and we really appreciate having you.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm really excited to talk about readiness for practice today.
And tell us, before we dive into that topic, tell us a little bit about Des Moines Area Community College.
Well, Des Moines Area Community College is a community college system in central Iowa. Consists of 7 different campuses, 5 of which have nursing programs. They also have all healthcare programs. As you saw, I'm the healthcare public services / nursing simulation coordinator. So I oversee not only nursing, which has about 400 students district-wide, depending on the semester, 400 to 450. I also oversee the paramedic program, which has, depending again on the semester, anywhere from 24 to about 52 students, and then also the respiratory therapy program, which has anywhere from about 24 to 30 some students every semester as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for representing Des Moines Area Community College, and thank you for what you're doing and what everyone's doing out there to keep learning going during this time. So let's transition to our topic, which is using simulation to evaluate nursing students' readiness for practice. You're passionate about this. What makes you so passionate, and what caused you to zero in on this?
Well, yes, I am very passionate about it. It's been a real focus of mine. I really want to see our students be successful. And when we started to hear our end users, some of our employers say, well, we don't really feel like your students are quite ready. I really wanted to get a better understanding of what that really meant. And so, and how can I, as a simulation coordinator, help get my students ready, or the students that come to sim ready for practice? And so, yeah, it's kind of been a passion of mine. It was a mini study that I did while I was working through my educational program for my EDD. And then I also have really made some changes to the way that we do sim here, which we'll talk about today, and then how we can get our students ready to enter into the workforce when they're done here.
Great, thank you. We're going to take a polling question just to get everybody engaged here, and we know it's for the East Coasters, it's after lunchtime. We want to keep everybody's energy up. So here's the polling question. How concerned are you about identifying gaps in readiness for practice now that much of the teaching has been forced to go virtual? We've actually reversed these questions, but that's okay. So are you not concerned? My institution has navigated this with no issues. Are you on alert? You feel like you're on a state of alert? We haven't achieved the right balance yet between live and virtual sim. Or are you just plain stressed? The constant change in state regulations, plus student and faculty concerns about health and safety, etc., have all just left me kind of wigged out. So are you not concerned at all, on alert, or are you stressed? Let's see what happens with the results that come in. So people are on alert. Well, okay. So, all right. Only 4% of you are not concerned. All right. Never regret taking a precaution, right? So that's good that people are generally on alert. And I'm sorry for those 36% that are stressed. 61% of the people are on alert. Before you continue, Melody, I just want to, one thing I glossed over, possibly a little too much coffee at lunch. We are going to take audience questions at the end. Just want to make sure we emphasize that, and want to make sure that, please, if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A feature. Please use the chat to talk amongst yourselves, but please put the Q&A for Melody in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We're going to make sure that we have time to take your questions. So let's take a look at this. People are on alert. So you could probably shed some insight by just beginning with, is there agreement right now on what readiness really means for a new nurse graduating from school?
Yeah, so, and we'll kind of, I believe, cycle back to what the audience is thinking about that whole concept.
Sure, yep, we'll come back to it.
So actually there is not agreement on what readiness for practice is, which really, again, when working with our employers, that's where that real disconnect really started to intrigue me, I guess is the word. So there is not a true agreement on it. Some recent authors use some interesting terms to describe that. I saw in an article from 2017, they called it a nebulous. It's a nebulous concept, this whole thing about readiness for practice. So if you are thinking about boards, readiness for practice could be, okay, you passed boards, so therefore you should be ready for practice, right? However, that's not true, because when they pass boards, basically it's, do they understand what it means to be a safe practitioner based on the cognitive questions that are presented on board? If you are a student, maybe your concept of readiness for practice is, I'm confident in my skills. There's a lot of studies that show with students, self-perceptions of readiness for practice, it's usually related to how confident they are in their skills, how confident they are in their knowledge related to a certain patient population or certain disease processes. Usually that's related to what they cared for in their clinical settings. So if they took care of a lot of patients with respiratory issues, they're pretty confident in those. They feel ready to care for those types of patients. If you're an educator, your concept of readiness for practice is, hey, we've checked off all our course competencies, they've passed all their clinical competencies, they're safe in clinical, so they're, quote, ready for practice. If you're on the employer side, or if you're on the staff nurse side, we have a whole different concept of readiness for practice.
Sure.
Some staff nurses expect that students are ready to hit the ground running as soon as they're hired, especially if they had been a technician or a CNA on that unit, or if they had done a lot of clinical time on that unit. Other employers say, okay, they should be ready for practice as soon as they're done with orientation. And this really wasn't supposed to be about COVID, but I will kind of throw COVID in there real quickly. As it relates to orientation, we're seeing orientation times being shortened in some instances because of COVID. So that, are they ready for practice at the end of orientation, is now sometimes even shorter than it was before. The implementation of nurse residency programs, I think, has kind of helped buffer that a little bit. But yeah, it's all over the place, as you can tell, as to what it means to be ready for practice.
Sure, and it sounds it. So let's transition to an area that might help clarify things for people and clarify where you're coming from. So we had, for the benefit of the audience, we always have a number of discussions before we have one of these suns, and we got into a shared mental model, one that led to another. So we're going to digress for a minute, and we're going to take a look at a high-performing team, because I know one of the things you'd like to talk about is high-performing teams. So we're going to go out of healthcare for just a moment, and we're going to take a look at this high-performing team, the Navy SEALs. I would encourage anyone, if they have a chance, to Google for the 2-minute video, the summary of Simon Sinek's evaluation, his analysis of the Navy SEALs. He had posed the question to the Navy SEALs, again, one of the highest performing teams in the world: what's more important in your credentialing process, performance versus trust? And lo and behold, what he heard surprised him. So if on a scale of performance versus trust, and you can see high performance at one end and low trust there in the upper left-hand corner, and all the way down at the bottom is low performance, high trust. So I think everyone gets the chart. What he found, what the Navy SEALs said was, well, we'd rather have someone who performs to the minimum level, which would be adequate in their terms. They're a high-performing team, so they pass all the tests, but they'd rather have someone who exhibits high trust. Okay, the high performance, high trust, of course, is the ultimate goal. But in an organization like that, where their standards are so high, it's hard to find someone that hits that grade. They're the extreme. Certainly, they don't want somebody with low performance and low trust. But what intrigued him was high performance, low trust was not acceptable in their terms. They would rather have that adequate performer and then have that backed by high trust. So that leads into its partner in healthcare and in credentialing and understanding whether a nurse is ready for practice. Skills versus competency. So why don't I turn that over to you, Melody, and you can talk to this.
So as we started to try to figure out where is that disconnect in our own, we really started to look at what defines readiness for practice from our employer side. And our employers were telling us, you know, we can teach them how to use the equipment. We can teach them how to use the IV pumps that we have. We can teach them how to use the Foley kits that we have. We can teach them those kinds of things. But what we can't teach them in the short amount of time that we have them to get them ready is that competence. And so when we talk about competence, we'll kind of talk about definitions here in just a little bit, but it's more those cognitive things. You know, can they think? Can they figure out what to do if there's an emergency? Do they know how to delegate? What and those affective domain things, teamwork, personality issues, I guess, or personality things. Trustworthiness falls into that as well. And so really, again, when we look at readiness for practice, when we start talking about the definitions from the literature, as well as some of the things that we've done here, it's really about competency and cognitive and affective domains rather than those psychomotor type skills that are really the biggest issue that indicates readiness for practice.
Sure,
Andrew,
absolutely.
do you mind if I just real quickly, I know we're not supposed to like really answer questions, but I did
Please, go for
it. Answer a real quick question that I saw pop up because I think it's really pertinent. When I talk about the studies that I've looked at, when I talk about the decisions that we've made related to how we manage readiness for practice, it is with the undergraduate student. And so there are studies out there, though, that look at advanced practice students and their readiness for practice, and it's really not that different. Obviously, the competencies and the psychomotor skills are clearly different, but it's still that same balance that you have on the screen here about what defines readiness for practice for them as well.
I thought what was interesting is that you could have someone that's passed every objective and easily measurable criteria. I shouldn't say, because some of the soft skills are measurable. But I thought it was interesting that you could have someone that is technically 100% astute and even a high achiever in that realm, but still couldn't put all the puzzle pieces together, and couldn't work across interdisciplinary teams, couldn't work effectively with a patient, couldn't manage the human emotions that you get in a healthcare setting, or manage some of the interpersonal dynamics. So when you came to us with this topic, intriguing. So why don't we move on then to the next question, which is, by creating a new definition for readiness, or a localized one for your institution, are we adding confusion? Are we just adding one more layer? Or do you feel that we're taking a layer off?
Yeah, and I didn't really talk about what definitions are out there because of how the polling questions ended up being
Sure,
like
sure,
that.
sure.
So I kind of wanted to wait till this slide to address that. So in 2008, there was a big study, and I will provide these references to everyone, and Andrew will talk about how you will get those references here
Yep.
at the end. But in 2008, there was a big study by the Nurse Resources organization that looked at what defines readiness for practice. Huge multi-site study, and it came up with 36 indicators of readiness for practice. So they surveyed healthcare providers, they surveyed employers, they surveyed precepting nurses to say what defines readiness for practice. So they came up with this list of 36. And of those 36, only 6 of them were psychomotor. So hands-on skill type things. 18 of them were in what we would consider the cognitive domain, critical thinking, prioritization, knowing how to delegate, what to delegate, recognizing a deteriorating patient, those kinds of things. And then the rest of them were in the affective domain, things we just talked about, teamwork, being able to take criticism, being able to work with others, conflict resolution, all those kinds of things. So that was in 2008, and that list actually has been utilized a lot in different studies to kind of indicate readiness for practice. So you would think it is 2020, you would think that we would have this all figured out by now and that list would be different, but it's not. There have been multiple studies since then that show the exact same thing. It's really all about their ability to think and their ability to work within teams and work within those personality dynamics, as you talked about. So for us here, we actually looked at that list originally and thought, okay, what can we do in SIM to help with that list? Well, the list is daunting. And as you can imagine, we may not be able to cover all of them. And even if we did, they're really not going to be, quote, ready for practice, ready to hit the ground running, just because of how nursing school is. Nursing students, new graduate nurses, need some time in real practice to hone those types of skills. But what we could do is we could at least get them jump started.
Sure.
So what we chose to do is we chose to focus on more of those cognitive and affective domain types of skills, as you would say, in simulation rather than more of the psychomotor type of skills. So our definition of check they're ready for practice, again, meaning they're ready to enter the workforce and learn more. It doesn't mean they're ready to hit the ground running, but ready to enter the workforce and learn more is really focusing on more of those. We have a more cognitive type list and an affective type list that we're really focusing on in SIM. So that's kind of the long answer to the short question, because I wanted to kind of tie everything together as we get to the next polling question.
Well, yes, and so we're going to go to that polling question, and this is the beauty of doing it live, folks. There are no bloopers here. You get to see them if they occur, but actually things happen for a reason. So I think this poll works just perfectly fine here. So barring everything that Melody just said, because she's kind of given you the cliff notes or some ability to cheat on this question, but if you were coming in cold, how comfortable are you with your students' readiness for practice? So here are your options. No worries, I would let them take care of my own family. Next, it's up to them now. The NCLEX exam is what will sort it all out. I'm a bit apprehensive. The NCLEX exam only means so much, and nurse preceptors are tough. And then lastly, I'm markedly concerned. First year attrition rates are too high, so something must be wrong. So no worries, it's up to them now, a bit apprehensive or markedly concerned. And if everyone would take a moment to respond to that poll, we'll share the results in just a second. And here we are. So, okay, so 9% of the people out there would let their nurses take care of their own family member. Bravo. That's outstanding. 4% are saying though, and I love this, there was no real logic to the order of these questions. And we weren't trying to bake them in any particular direction. So it's up to them now. Only 4% said that. So that's outstanding. So people are a bit apprehensive. They know that nurse preceptors are tough and the NCLEX exams only can identify so much. And then 28%, so that's 60%, then 20%, 28%, I apologize, are markedly concerned and they're aware of first year attrition rates. So, and we're gonna get to those rates in just a little bit. So brilliant. Why don't we move ahead then? I hope that gives you, Melody, a good feel for where people are coming from as we continue. So you had an interesting comment on this. What are the benefits of live versus virtual sim to identify readiness for gaps? And maybe you could talk about virtual sim right now in the context of what you've always been doing. And it's not just about COVID and the world post-COVID.
Yeah, so I actually, just as a backdrop, I actually was scheduled to present this at the Live Sun prior to COVID actually happening. And we have been using some virtual components to our final semester student experiences for a couple of years now. So what's kind of nice is when that happened when COVID hit was right as we were kind of ending that semester. So we actually had some stuff in our back pocket that we were already using or had used in the past. And so there are actually some benefits to utilizing a virtual platform to evaluate those ready for practice components, depending on what you decide they are. And I will talk about that here in just a second. But so there are some benefits to using some things we can see in live a lot better. And some things live doesn't give us a good enough picture that we want. So we can actually look at some stuff in the virtual realm and get a better, clearer picture of how students are dealing with some certain things, such as maybe even prioritization, teamwork, delegations. Believe it or not, delegation is really easy to evaluate in the virtual realm. And how they would assign things to other students, that kind of thing. So as I said earlier, our list relates to more things related to teamwork, critical thinking, prioritization, delegation, those types of things. And I'll talk about different examples of how we evaluate those in the different realms in a little bit. But I did just real quickly, Andrew, if you don't mind, want to toggle back to how we do evaluate in SIM here. So we do not give a grade. So if we notice that the students are struggling with maybe what we would consider a readiness for practice component, then we will provide them feedback. We might say, I really think you need to improve upon this area, and here is why. We do tie all of our readiness for practice components to patient safety. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Sure, because we're gonna spend some time looking at examples, just FYI. But please keep going. But for the benefit of the audience,
we provide feedback to them. We don't fail them in SIM, because that's not the purpose of SIM in our program. So, but we do provide that feedback. We do give needs improvements on those particular areas, and then provide them with some resources to maybe help hone that particular area as they're heading into their preceptorship in our program. So we give them that feedback prior to preceptorship. We talk about what they should focus on in their preceptorship program to help better prepare them to enter into practice.
Got it. So let's take a look though at now just some drawbacks of using live versus sim. And some of that I think you've already covered, but if you'd like to go a little deeper on that, and then we're going to get to methods that you're going to recommend and some examples of what you've used.
Yeah, so obviously if we look at what are some drawbacks to live, again, it depends on how you have your simulations set up. We always function in teams. And if they are function individual, they always have the option to call for resources, ask for help, that kind of stuff. So one of the things you can't evaluate really well in when you have your students in a team setting, like 2 or 3 of them in a sim room together, is really their understanding of their critical thinking components. You can hear them talking through things, but if they're bouncing ideas off another person, are they really able to do that all by themselves if they were left alone? But I do think it's important that we understand and help students understand that you shouldn't be making decisions completely on your own. You should be able to take advantage of those resources. One of the things on that list, and again, I will share that actual study in a way here a little bit later. But one of the things on that Readiness for Practice list is to know when to ask for help. So one of the things we can do in live is we can say, okay, you've got all these resources, but do they really know when to ask for help? Do they know when they're overwhelmed? Or just they're going to try to plug through it and make a mistake with their patient. Obviously, there are some skill components to Readiness for Practice. Those clearly can only be evaluated in the live setting, not the virtual setting. Unless we have them on video, which that's a whole nother thing we'll talk about in a little bit. But so obviously, if you want to be able to see them do, the live setting's where it needs to happen. If you want to see them think, the virtual setting is a good place to do that as well.
I'm gonna just say that again because that I'm actually making a note of that. So if you want to see them do _do, that's for a live setting. If you want to see them,
you can see them think in the live setting, but
sure.
it's a little more relaxed. They're always doing something else at the same time. But so if you want to see them think and do together, the live setting's great. But if you just want to see them think, listen to them think, listen to them process, the virtual setting is really good for that. Because that's all they're doing there. They're not distracted by other things happening.
Excellent. That's my quote for the day, so thank you. I'll be sharing that and I'll be quoting you. So let's talk about live methods that you'd recommend for others. If we could take some of your favorite experiences or experiences that have worked for you that you'd recommend for others, that would be great. And we're doing well on time, so feel free.
Yeah, because I want to leave time for questions. Again, I can see your chat, so I'm kind of saying you guys are asking some great questions, and I think having some great discussion in the chat, so I'm excited to hear what questions you have at the end. So what we did, as I said, we worked with our employers and said, where are those gaps? What are those things that they're really, really struggling with before they get to you? So one of the things that I would highly recommend that you do is a needs assessment with your potential employers. I mean, clearly you have those institutions where the majority of your students go to be employed. And so I would do a needs assessment, and that's exactly what we did. Where are the holes? Where are our students, our individual students really struggling? Because we want to make them, we want to help them be better for you as an employer. And again, that's when they said, don't focus so much on the skills. We really need them to be able to think, and we need them to be able to work as a team member. That list of 36 is actually the list that's used by one of the nurse residency programs in this area. So that's one of the other reasons why we kind of went back to that list. So, so we got that information for our employers, and then we started looking at how can we better prepare our students. So one of the things was they really struggled with SBAR, giving report, not just to healthcare providers, but also to other nurses, to, succinct in their information, that kind of stuff. So we start doing SBAR at the very beginning with our students, just as simple as let's practice making a physician phone call, all the way to multiple expectations of SBAR to healthcare providers, to paramedics, to other members of the disciplinary team. IPE, teamwork was a huge issue. So we infused IPE components in it throughout our program. They struggle with prioritization and emergency situations and recognizing deterioration. So we added mock codes into our program. So every single student runs a mock code. They identify deteriorating patients, they call that code, and they figure out how to work as a team as part of that code. Again, those leadership delegation opportunities, we added in a multi-patient simulation. We call it the Charge Nurse Challenge for our LP or for our RN students, and we call it the Team Lead Challenge for our PN students. But it's a multi-patient delegation experience where they have to delegate, they have to do assignments, all those kinds of things that they would have to do when they get out in practice. And yeah, they do some of those like leadership things and clinical, but there's always somebody there to help them make decisions. In SIM, there's nobody there to help them make decisions. They have to make whatever decisions they need to. So again, if you want to see them do and think at the same time, live. So how can you provide those opportunities for your students to do those things that you can watch how they're managing that and provide them that feedback?
I really love the idea of the leadership sims. That's cool.
That's one of our
flat out cool
to do. So
yeah, that's really great. So let's transition over to virtual now. So, and you've already given me my quote for the day, but I thought it was really intriguing when you first said that it was easier to see them think virtually, or easier is, I guess you could really create a zone where that's all you are focusing on. How do you do that, and what's your experiences, and what would you recommend for others in this arena?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have done now for a couple of years is we call it the risk management team simulation. And basically we took medical errors that we had access to, and again, I can share that website if someone's interested in it. But we took medical errors that we found, we created them, put the students onto what we call the risk management team. So gave them different roles to talk about. But basically what we wanted to see was how would they have handled this situation differently? How would they, what would they have done in this particular situation? And then really kind of see how they would have maybe prioritized differently. But then we divide them into little teams and let them work. But we ask them to stay where we can listen to them talk. So we can actually listen to them think and process through. They are given, there's a leader that's assigned, so then that leader has to delegate responsibilities. So we can see how are they delegating. We can see how are they encouraging their other team members to work together. That's always very interesting to watch team dynamics virtually. As you know, right now, probably you're all experiencing a lot of virtual stuff right now, so I'm sure you're watching. I have those students to stay off camera. They have to stay on camera, and we can watch how they're maybe pulling in other team members. So Andrew's my leader for the day. Okay, it's your job to ensure that everyone participates. Okay, so how do you do that when you've got this other student over here that's not paying attention? Will you step up and do what you need to pull that other student in? We just sit back and watch it all happen. And then we make notes and provide that feedback as we need to.
Very nice. I'm thinking that in some cases it may be reassuring for you sometimes a little humorous, and sometimes I'm sure you want to intervene.
Yeah, and that's hard. I will honestly tell you, in any of these situations, for those of you that have been doing some for a long time, it's so hard not to get right in the middle of it and fix it. Because it's you just want to help them, but you can't evaluate them if you help them, and you can't give them honest feedback, because otherwise you get, well, I would have done that if you would have given me time. So yeah, that's a great point. I like that, Andrew. Yeah, sometimes it's humorous, sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's frustrating. So
I can only imagine. So let's now let's we're going to come into the point where we're going to be able to take audience questions, and wow, the questions are really lining up. So this is
I'm
great.
excited to see them. So.
Yeah, I am too. Your long-term vision of success. So we're going to divide this in half and allow you first to talk about patients, and then we'll talk about students. So patients.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, when we were trying to decide what are we going to focus on, we really started to tie it back to patient safety.
There you go.
So looking at more of those cognitive and affective domain types of experiences that we wanted to evaluate and provide feedback, because we feel like in the live clinical setting, traditional clinical setting, they get a lot of feedback related to skills and maybe time management, that kind of stuff. So we wanted to focus on stuff that they didn't get maybe a lot of opportunities or feedback for in the traditional clinical setting. So we really wanted to focus on those patient safety components that we can manage in some. So even things as simple as, are they prepared for the clinical setting? And how does that tie to safety? Are they prepared to care for the patient? Have they done their research before they go see the patient? Do they even know what disease the patient has or medical condition? Have they researched that? Or are they just walking into a patient room cold and not really having any concept of what's going on with that patient? Communication, huge, both team and
responsible for 70% of all patient harm is breakdown communications. Forgive me for interrupting,
but go right ahead.
That's a
reflection. We focus on reflection. Are they able to self-critique? Are they able to critique a team member and provide feedback? How do they accept critique? Which again is one of those things that they struggle with in practice, is accepting critique from someone else and giving critique to someone else.
Sure.
Professionalism as far as ethical, legal types of concepts. Things as simple as, do they show up on time? Do they take on roles that they're assigned to take on? And then those other concepts is related to like prioritization. How did they prioritize their care for the day? Did they prioritize correctly or in a way that ensured patient safety? We're never about, oh, you should have done X, Y, and Z first, but ooh, if you didn't do X, Y, if you didn't do Y before Z, then ooh, we've got some patient safety issues here. So those are the components we focus on: professionalism, preparedness, reflection, professionalism, preparedness, communication, prioritization.
Well, this all goes back to that chart that we showed before, where we were looking at skills versus competence. Yep. So a team, I'm sure many on the line have heard this quote, that a team of experts is not an expert team. So we may have that person that has all the skills down, but in a team setting, that doesn't mean they can function as part of a team. Yeah. So let's now talk about new nurses, and I'll introduce this with a statistic that Laerdal is very concerned about, and it's the statistic to do with new nurse attrition rates. Anywhere from 17 to 20% of nurses leaving their first year, and then by the end of the second year, as many as 35%. That's terrible for them. It's terrible for the healthcare system. It puts a huge tax on healthcare, but it's especially terrible for someone who's devoted their passions and time and even finances to becoming a nurse. So what's your vision with regards to nurse success?
Yeah, well, clearly we want our graduates to be prepared for practice, and again, prepared for practice doesn't mean hit the ground running. It means that they have the skill sets to function within the healthcare setting today. So when you talk about that, those studies related to why they're leaving because it's harder than they thought it was going to be. It's not the environment that they were expecting. And they really struggle with I think the teamwork, and again, looking back at some of those studies, the teamwork, the conflict resolution, delegation, again, some of those cognitive or affective soft skills is really some of the reasons that they're leaving. It's not the psychomotor components that is causing them stress in the workplace. So our goal is that our students have in their toolbox how to deal with some of those issues that might occur related to what they have to think about and how they have to function in those environments.
Excellent. And you're well on your way to achieving your vision there at your institution. So, so bravo.
I am in the process prior to COVID. Darn that COVID. We were actually getting ready to look at a longitudinal study with one of our major employers to look at how are we doing with that. We've been doing this process now for about 5 years. When we started our new concept-based curriculum is when we started infusing all of these things and starting to look at how are they doing. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to resume that, get that study going after we're done trying to figure out how to function in our new world. So
excellent. So let's, you're getting questions, you're getting comments, and the lines have just lit up on this one.
Popped up, yeah. So yeah. Sorry.
The lines really, it's just been incredible to watch the dialogue as we've gone through this. So why don't we
pay attention to it, but I really want to. So you'll have to send me the chats when this is all done. It looks like great conversation you all are having.
I've been watching it and it's been fantastic. So how would you like to do this? Because with right now 49 questions, I can simply go from top to bottom. And or
is it? We've got about 15 minutes. We can maybe look at what are some of the themes. We could probably just work our way. And yeah, I would do top to bottom because maybe
sure.
they got answered.
Why don't we do that? So I think you're going to. So let's just begin with this one, which is sort of a recap of where we were at the very beginning. Do students overestimate their readiness?
Oh, yeah. Oh, huge. Well, and again, how do they define that? So again, as you look at these studies, and I will provide all the studies that I've used and some of the most current ones. I just did a quick lit review the other day, and there's some really good ones just out recently. But if you look at all the studies where students self-perception and then compare that to the employer, some students do overestimate their readiness for practice because they base it on what they had in school. So I'm really good at doing Foley catheters, and so I'm sure I'm ready. Or
sure.
Or I took care of. I'm going to go work on the same floor where I was a tech, so I'm sure I'm ready to work on that floor. And clearly, we know that they if we go back to Benner's model, they definitely are not as ready as they thought they were going to be. So.
Sure, of course. So here's another question. Do you all look at the readiness? I'm paraphrasing the question a little bit, but do you all look at a new nurse's readiness or your students' readiness on a year-by-year basis, or only when they graduate?
So when you say all, do you mean me?
Yes. So I'm direct. This is the. If you're looking at it, it's really the third question in.
Yeah. No, it's Oh, actually, I can't see those. I'll have to.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So do you look at year by year, or just your 4-year graduate nurses?
We actually are an associate degree program, so it's 2 years, but we kind of track that. Are they ready to move on to the next semester? Are they where we would expect them to be at the end of this semester as far as readiness? Because it has to be a growth. You can't just, has to be a transition. You can't say, oh, let's teach them everything they need to know about teamwork in term one. It has to be a transition. So we do kind of transition them. But as far as I said earlier, kind of give them that really good picture of, here, okay, here's where you are. You're going into your preceptorship, and they do a 120-hour preceptorship at the end of our program. You're going into your preceptorship. Here are the areas where you have gaps, and these are the areas that you need to work on during your preceptorship program component. Does that answer that question?
I think so. I think so. And for the audience, please bear with us if we're rather succinct in our responses, because the questions still continue to rise. And please watch the chat as Melody's answering questions, because other people are offering some interesting information too.
Yeah.
So your technique for teaching soft skills, do you have a particular model you use? Or the question specifically is, what is your technique for teaching soft skills?
Yeah, and again, we don't use a particular model per
Sure.
se, or a particular theorist as far as teaching soft skills. We try to infuse those soft skill opportunities into every simulation that we have related to teamwork, communication, delegation, decision making, which isn't necessarily a soft skill, but teamwork and delegation, I think, are probably the biggest that we infuse. Again, I don't use a particular theorist, or we don't use or a model, but just try to make sure that you infuse those opportunities, particular for communication and delegation and teamwork, into every single scenario that we do.
There you go. I know we're going to talk to everyone. There's a lot of questions about studies. We're not trying to get you to hang on to the last moment, but we are going to talk about how you can gain access to the various studies. So please bear with us on questions regarding that. How do you evaluate the cognitive skills, especially critical thinking? The literature feels non-existent on this.
It is non-existent on this. So again, we are providing feedback. We really focus on prioritization and those decision makings, and then the why behind their decisions. So prioritization is kind of our trigger. So, okay, so tell me, why did you give this med before you did this, before this assessment? Or tell me why you did this skill in this particular order. So we're not focused on the skill. We're wondering, why on earth did you do that? Why did you put the Foley in when your patient's pulse ox is 88%? So help me understand why that happened. And so really just honing in more, providing those opportunities, and focusing more on the why behind their prioritization, which really helps us understand their thinking a little bit better.
Very good. Let's see. Again, I'm going through questions, folks. Anything that we can tie together where Melody will be kind enough to make herself available later, I'm going to answer at the end.
I will. Andrew will tell you how to get a hold of me and how to make that connection with me personally, so you can sure follow up with anything after this.
I'm really glad that people are asking so many questions and asking for so much information. It really makes for a rich experience. Melody, are your sims evaluative, high stakes, or pass-fail?
They are evaluative only. We do not do high stakes or pass-fail. That was a decision by the nursing program to not do that, and make them more of that learning opportunity and feedback opportunity, feedback for performance versus evaluation.
Very good. How do you handle debriefing in virtual simulation?
We debrief the exact same way that we debrief in live. We use the NASCO debriefing standard as our guide. And again, what went well, what didn't go so well, what would you have done differently, what feedback do you have for your peers? We use the exact same process that we would in live sim.
Very good. Let's see. So I think I'm glossing through these questions, so you already answered the question about.
I'll make a note. I just saw what debriefing standard. I will.
The Anaxel standard.
Standards in my lit review for you.
Sure, excellent. What percent are you using live versus virtual?
Well,
So do
right
you have a
now during
balance?
COVID, is that the question?
As,
So for nursing, depending on the course, it's 70% live, 25% virtual right now. Some of in our higher level courses, in our lower level courses, we're doing 50-50. The Sim Center is at 50% capacity right now because of COVID. Prior to that, the only virtual experience we had was in our senior level program, which was that risk management simulation.
I'm making notes for myself. Bear with me on some of these questions.
Yeah, so to answer that question, then in our senior level, they would have had they would have had 2 live experiences, those multi-patient, and then we do a disaster simulation, and then they would have had the 1 virtual. So it would have been 33% virtual in that course.
Very good. Here's one from Melissa. We typically have a mock code in critical care senior year. Or, okay, so I take that to mean during senior year. We typically have a mock code in critical care during senior year. I've wanted to add it earlier in the program. What are your thoughts?
We actually do it earlier in the program. We do what we call a known code. So we actually talk about what is a code team, how does a code team work. You're going to run a code today, sometime during the day. We don't tell them when, just sometime during the day. We prep them. We did it in the previous semester, so they know exactly that we talk about code teams, talk about roles, we talk about teamwork, all that kind of stuff. And then sometime throughout that day, we run a code whenever it works for us. So then in their senior year, their last semester, we do what we call unknown codes. Random codes is what we call them. So we just run a code whenever we feel like it. So the students know that they can have a code any single day they're in SEM. And they're in SEM 5 different days in that course. So any of those 5 days, they can have a code. In the multi-patient SIM, we run codes as well. Again, it's how it works for us as far as timing goes. What we found when we tried to do what we call those last codes is the students were just really struggled because they weren't ready. So I always say if a sim goes wrong, you can put this quote down too, Andrew. If a sim goes wrong, it's a design flaw, not a student flaw.
Very good.
So if a sim goes massively wrong, there's a design flaw somewhere. So I would highly recommend doing it earlier, but do it as a known code and let them be prepared and let them be successful, and then let them take that success into the next course.
I like the extreme ownership in that. That's great. Okay, so here's one that a Laerdal person shouldn't be asking without knowing the answer, but we're gonna ask it anyhow. My colleagues are bracing themselves. How do you do virtual simulation? Is there a software that you use or that is used?
Right. We do not have a software. Sorry, Andrew. We do not use a particular product for virtual sim. We do it just on our own. We created them because we needed it to be very specific, to give us very specific objectives and very specific content. So we actually created it on our own. It's not that we couldn't have used a product that was out there. It's just there wasn't one that met our very, very specific needs for that particular content.
So I would invite anyone to go to the Laerdal website and look for vSim because we do offer virtual sim. So if we can be of help, by all means, please let us know.
And that is a great product. I have used it in the past. We just didn't use it for that particular experience. So.
And thank you for that, Melody. We certainly appreciate the endorsement. More questions that we can answer in just a moment on where you're going to be able to find all this information. This one's a bit of a long one. Okay. So here we go. So many larger facilities in New England often have, quote, new graduate nursing programs where students will communicate often, teach skills, be involved in prioritizing, I believe, prioritizing cases or patients. And they're put into situations where they're going to be concerned or frightened. So with multiple nursing programs and multiple facilities in a confined area, how can we bring these needs, I think, of all the different schools closer together? Is it a problem with curriculum, or do you think it's a problem with hospital practices? So go ahead. If you understood that question clearly, then I'll let you go.
I don't know if the person that asked that's still in, so I might ask a quick follow-up question. So is the concern that we are throwing students into situations that are detrimental to them, and then that gives them, decreases their confidence or puts them into those frightening situations? I guess I feel like, are they still doing what we used to do in some 15 years ago, where let's just throw them in and watch them fail and see what happens? Is that what I hear you saying is happening?
I think what I'm interpreting, and this question came in from Diane, and Diane, if you can put something in the chat if I'm incorrect. But I think what Diane is saying is we put these people, we put the new nurses into these various hospitals, and that's where actually where they're being put into the 30-foot
Gotcha.
end of the pool.
Okay, so you're talking about we're throwing these new grads into situations that they're not ready for, and that's where the issue is. Is that what I?
And she's wondering, is it a problem with the curriculum at the nursing school?
Said, yes, that's the issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely think that the hospitals need to get together. I would be curious to know if they have residency programs, because there are very specific guidelines in residency programs that say don't do that. Nurse residency programs. And is there some way, even if they don't have a formal nurse residency program, that they could do more of a transition to them into practice situation? It sounds to me like that's more of an orientation issue. And yeah, I think all those hospitals need to get together. If it's a student issue, that's maybe another conversation to have. But.
Sure. So we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to talk about where people can find the other resources, because we have people asking about the 2008 study that you mentioned.
Up there for you.
The list of 36, the risk management scenarios. So if everyone would look at that bottom bullet, we certainly have a number of resources that are available to everybody during this time. The COVID Resource Center at laerdal.com/coronavirus is one. We invite you certainly to dial into our future virtual suns, but this bottom bullet point, we're hoping that everyone, if you're not a member of our Sun Facebook group page, it's only available to people who either have attended an in-person sun or these virtual suns during 2020. Please sign up, please join, and Melody will be on there and has graciously offered to share her resources there, offer any advice, share these the different studies that you've mentioned, including that 2008 study.
Yeah, definitely.
And if we can answer any questions as an organization, we mentioned some statistics on patient safety, for example, or anything else, by all means, please pose your questions on the Sun Facebook group.
Yeah, and I will just quickly, because I have a minute, I'll just quickly say I like to wait till the end to give resources because of this reason, because then we see that many more come up.
Sure.
And the question is, if you're not on Facebook, which I'm not a huge Facebook person either, I'll just say that right up front. Andrew knows this. And so sometimes I don't always get back on there. But you can, if you need to reach out to me personally, you can sure go to the DMACC website, dmacc.edu, and you just search my name and you can get my direct email that way.
Melody, thank you. We'll be following up with everyone with a survey. We'll be offering some other resources that tie into Melody's presentation. Melody, thank you so much. Melody Bethards from Des Moines Area Community College. It's so nice to have you on here.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. Hopefully that it gave some people some things to think about. And again, I'm available for follow-up questions if you need to. So.
That's wonderful. Melody, thank you. Thank everyone who dialed in. Make it a great day. And remember, simulation, humans are overrated.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Very much.
Make it a great one. Bye-bye.